Well, hello, a very good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you are tuning in from. And I say that at the beginning of every webinar, but this is particularly true for this webinar because Anna and I are in two very different time zones. So it's 10 a.m. here in the UK. Anna, what time is it in Perth?
6 p.m.
6 p.m. We're on the same day though, right, aren't we?
We are on the same day, yes.
Yeah. It's not. It's in the evening UK time. It's morning in Australia. So, well, to everyone tuning in, a very warm welcome to this BA Community webinar. My name is Adrian Reed, and I am really pleased to introduce a speaker for you today that I'm really looking forward to seeing. Anna Rajander is well, in fact, was BA of the Year, the Dr. Cecily McDougall Award, so a high esteem indeed, is a published author for BA Digest and BA Times, and is the IIBA branch chair for Perth, as well as, of course, as being an extremely experienced senior business analyst. And the title of Anna's topic has really resonated with a number of you today. And I know that because we've had literally hundreds of registrations. So if you're just arriving now, don't forget the chat is open. So why not type in the chat where you're from, and you can kind of have like a side chat with the other people who are on the on the call as well. So Anna's presentation today is entitled "What's the Point? The Relationship Between Business Analysis and Value." So Anna, over to you.
Oh, thank you very much, Adrian. So, as you can see, as has already been stated, the title of my presentation today is "What's the Point? The Relationship Between Business Analysis and Business Value." Now, I'm going to explore the relationship between business value and business analysis. Hang on, let me get all sorted. There we go. But I explore the relationship between business analysis and business value by basically looking at it through two questions. The first question, how do we measure the value of business analysis? And the second question, how do we realise the value of business analysis? But before I get too much into the presentation, I just want to say that I'm presenting today from southwestern Australia. The traditional owners on the land of which I am on is the Whadjuk Noongar people. I would like to briefly acknowledge the Whadjuk people and their continuing connection to this land and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And say kia from Whadjuk country. So, how do we measure the value of business analysis? I'd like to explore this question by focusing on a few key facts that I think we can all accept. Firstly, value cannot be delivered. Value creation is key for any organisation. And business analysis in and of itself does not deliver any value. So let's start with the first fact. Value cannot be delivered. Rather, value is created, released, or realised through the use of an organisation's products or services. So that kind of leads to the first step to measuring the value of business analysis, understanding how the enterprise creates value. So in order to do that, we need to understand what the value proposition of the organisation is. What are its services and products? And who are these products and services for? What are the consumers, customers, users of the products and services? Because it is through the consumption of those products and services that business value is created. So far, fairly easy. So the second fact, value creation is key for any organisation. Essentially, anything an organisation does should have some relationship to its value proposition. So that kind of leads to step two. Understand the initiative's relationship with business value. So whatever initiative you're working on as a business analyst, be it a project, be it maybe some sort of pre-project work, an investigation, some sort of continuous improvement activity, it should have some sort of relationship with the value proposition. Business model canvas is a good way of looking at your value proposition and the relationship of everything the organisation does with that value proposition. Now, I'm not going to go into business model canvas, how to do it or anything in too much detail, because there was a fabulous webinar that Sam Merrick did with Adrian that's available on YouTube, where he did it in far more entertaining fashion than I ever could. So I urge you to go check that out. But just to briefly give some examples, are you introducing new customers to your products and services? Are you improving your products and services or adding new products or service streams? Are you maybe pushing your services through new channels, whether that be some sort of digital channel or even a shop front or something like that? Are you trying to improve your relationship with your customers, maybe to improve customer retention? Revenue streams, are you trying to open up new revenue streams, perhaps by maybe creating a subscription model? Key resources, are you introducing new key resources in order to support your business? Perhaps you are selling assets, perhaps you are trying to get new staff in, training them up, because of course staff are always a key resource. Key activities, are you trying to improve your business processes or perhaps automating some activities to make them more efficient? Your partners and suppliers, are you bringing new suppliers on board, perhaps maybe getting better supply streams open? And cost structures, are you trying to move more to a OPEX type structure than a CAPEX type structure? Now, most projects or large initiatives will be probably doing things that impact lots of these sorts of areas, but at the end of the day, they all have a relationship to that value proposition. In some way, they are helping the organisation build that value proposition, improve it, whatever it might be. But whatever you're doing in your initiative should be linked to that proposition. Now, I said before, business model canvas is a good way of organising things so you can see how everything relates to the value proposition. However, there is an exception to that. In cases where you're analysing a system more from a system manager role, I find the business model canvas less useful. So I'm thinking about instances where perhaps you are trying to move a group of semi-autonomous or autonomous organisations just towards some sort of greater objectives. So thinking about health system, education system, disability support, aged care, justice system, perhaps some sort of regional or business development agency. Those sorts of things where you're trying to look at things systematically, it's very difficult to use business model canvas. Now, in those situations, there is usually some sort of lofty vision, mission, objective or goal, you know, improving health outcomes, more efficient care, equal access to everybody. And in some cases, there's even a very defined target, net zero 2030. So in that case, the value is less about business value and more about the social or common good that can be achieved by moving towards that target. And a lot of those targets are quite long-term, 5, 10, 15 years. But what you can do is you can look at how your initiative is moving towards that target or bringing everybody closer towards that target and look at things in terms of key performance indicators. And for that, something like the business balance scorecard is a good tool because not only does it allow you to think about different types of indicators, it can also help you avoid perverse incentives in those sorts of systems. What do I mean by that? I'll provide an example. So take healthcare. We often look at reducing the cost of an episode of care. So how long it takes to treat somebody, because that's often a good indicator of efficiency and financial savings. And one indicator that hospitals often use is length of patient stay. So how long the patient is physically taking up a bed. You want to reduce that as much as possible, but at the same time, you don't want to make doctors or nurses feel under pressure to discharge patients early. So often you have a countermeasure, such as emergency readmission rate. So you're actually tracking the people who are coming back into hospital shortly after they've been occupied a bed. And it's all about getting that balance between your length of patient stay, getting that down as far as possible without your emergency readmissions creeping too far up. So you're avoiding those perverse incentives. So that's quite a difficult thing to do when you're looking at those more systematic problems. So in summary, if you've got a nice defined enterprise that has quite a lot of control over its resources, or even break that down into a department or something like that, your business model canvas is a brilliant tool. If you're looking at things or analysing things more from a system manager and trying to manage, coordinate, influence groups of organisations towards a common goal, then maybe look at something like key performance indicators. So moving on, fact 3, business analysis in and of itself does not deliver value. Very rarely do we do analysis for analysis' sake. Usually, at least you'd hope some sort of decision is made based on the analysis, at least, but usually the analysis is contributing to some sort of greater project, and lots of things are happening in and around or based upon your business analysis. So step 3 is to understand the role of your analysis in the initiative. Again, whether that initiative be a project or be defined as some other sort of task. Benefits dependency map is a great tool for that. Again, Sam Merrick's presentation goes into this way better than I will. But essentially, what you're looking at is your enabling changes, so the things that have to happen in order to affect a business change. Off your business change, you've got your business benefit, and that business benefit is either linked back towards your business model canvas, the areas in which you are improving in order to improve your business value, or you can link that to your objectives, your lofty common goals that you're trying to achieve if you're looking at this from more of a system manager's perspective. And of course, all your benefits should be measurable. So at the end of the day, if you can work out what your enabling changes are that involve business analysis, and then track those through to your business benefits, then ultimately you can make the argument that whatever value is delivered as a result of the delivery of that benefit, some of that can be attributed back to your enabling change. And therefore, hopefully you can say your business analysis was of some value. But then we get to the question, so how do we realise the value of business analysis? Or more importantly, probably when do we realise the value of business analysis? And for that, I want to go back and look at fact 3 a little bit more. Business analysis in and of itself does not deliver any value. Now, I've thought about this a little bit, and I've created a bit of a formula for releasing the value of business analysis, and it goes a little bit like this. Business analysis times business change equals business benefit. Quite simple. Business analysis is meant to be all about enabling business change, and good business analysis can actually help you select the best option, can help you understand your stakeholders better, get all your requirements and effect the best business change in order to deliver the best business benefits. So that's why I've used times, because decent business analysis can dramatically increase the quality of your change and the delivery of benefits. Another way of looking at it is a bit like a battery. Business analysis is sort of an activity that tends to build over time. You know, we look at our business context, we understand the problem, we identify our stakeholders, think about their perspective, look at the solution options, we then select the best option, we then go into our requirements. These things build over time. And you can think of it like a rechargeable battery. As you go through that business analysis process, you kind of charge your battery through each step as you understand the problem better and get the better solution and get the better requirements. And then at the point when you've effected the change, that's when the value of business analysis is released. However, this brings me on to an important 4th fact. Value is not constant. Now, something that I've often thought about as I've gone through and reading books, and you see all these things about agile and product management and DevOps, and I read these books and I see these things on LinkedIn and everything, and I think, oh, gee, these are great. They always have such brilliant examples. And the example is usually a shop in a defined location where the business analyst has really, really good access to key decision makers. And you read it and think, gee, that's great. How does that apply to my statewide, heavily regulated government-owned Quango? Well, sometimes it doesn't. And even though I'm sure these organisations exist that are able to implement these methodologies purely, a lot of us are in organisations where we can't. So it's quite important to understand the relationship between the methodology that you're using, how that impacts when and how you deliver your requirements, and how that may impact the value you can deliver in terms of your business analysis. I'll try and explain it through a few examples. So first of all, let's think about our brilliant agile product management, DevOps, fully everything organisation. So they've gone through and they've recharged their business analysis battery. In this case, if you're thinking agile with short sprints, it's probably like a AA battery because they won't recharge and release very, very often. And then very, very close to the point in time that the change is, you stop your analysis, you effect the change, and the value is released. But that point between you finalising your analysis and the change occurring is as short as possible, which means you're able to maximise the value released from your analysis. Now let's take the converse example. Let's say we're a little bit more waterfall than agile. So we've gone through the motions, we've charged our battery right up, and we've finalised our requirements, and then we aren't allowed to touch them. It's kind of hands off. There's some big procurement going on or something's happening, whatever, you can't touch. It's very difficult to change your requirements after a certain point. Well, throughout that time, because value isn't constant, there is a risk that the value of your analysis is going to diminish because things are going to change. And ultimately, the value that is released from your analysis is not what you intended it to be. Because if you had all the information that was available at the point of the change, you probably would have done things differently. So that's one risk to realising the value of business analysis, that time between finalising requirements and implementation of the change, which is obviously a big risk associated with waterfall type projects. However, another one is a lapse between solution delivery and full implementation of the change. So what I mean by that, I can give an example of that. Was project managing an agile software development project. It was full agile, which was brilliant. Got an external development team to supplement some resources in the internal team, did the sprints, did everything properly, developed this brilliant product, was all ready to release it. But unfortunately, the product, in order for it to be released, it required the implementation of a bunch of screens in order to present the product to the workforce. And because of COVID, the electrician didn't have the required supplies. So it sat there and it sat there and it sat there. And during that period of time, people said, well, could we have added that to the product? Oh, do you realise that they've released another version of that software product that actually fulfills the requirement that your one was going to do? Ultimately, it impacted the value that was released from that product. So that is often a risk. So even in cases where you may be trying to do things agile, project management, DevOps, it sometimes doesn't work out, because often a lot of these projects will often have something in there that's a little bit more waterfall that you are dependent on. Now you can see how those sorts of things can add up. So if you have a project where there's a defined point where you have to finalise your requirements, and then there's a defined point between that and the delivery of the change, and then a defined point between that and the implementation of the change, these things can add up and impact the total value that is released from your analysis. The final risk I just want to briefly discuss is protracted timeframes. So this is when you're looking at your analysis, you're building up, you're building that, you're starting out your analysis, you're building out you're charging your battery as you go through the motions. You think it's the right time to do the analysis, but then something happens and something gets shelved for a bit. So the charge in your battery goes down. And then in order to make up for that, when things start up again, you have to redo some of the analysis in order to build that charge up. And you end up going on this little roller coaster because things aren't quite happening the way you expected. In Agile, they talk a lot about just in time. And this is why you want to do things just in time, because otherwise you'll end up redoing things over and over. But sometimes that just in time is hard to pick. So to summarise, 4 key facts that can help us understand and measure the relationship between business analysis and business value is: value cannot be delivered. It is created, released or realised through the use of an organisation's products or services. Value creation is key for an organisation. Everything an organisation does has some relationship, or should have some relationship, with how it creates value. Otherwise, it's doing things for no purpose. Business analysis in and of itself does not deliver value. Something else has to happen in order to change. Business analysis is about enabling that change, but without that change, we aren't going to deliver any value. And finally, value is not constant. So if you can't deliver your analysis in a timely fashion, that can impact or risk the total value that is released. That's the end of my presentation. Are there any questions?
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Anna. I think that there's so much food for thought there, and I'm sure people will have questions. So do if you're attending live, do pop your question into the Q&A panel, and we'll cover as many as we can. And just while you're doing that, I wanted to just pick up on something in the chat that Cedric's mentioned, that for information, the value definition from the European standard EN 12973 of value management is value equals needs satisfaction divided by resources consumed, which I thought was a really interesting take on things as well. And actually, much
is that another way of saying cost benefit?
Yeah, in a way it is, isn't it? And so now I'm going to be Googling European Standard EN 12973 after this webinar. So if you happen to have the URL for that, Cedric, pop it in the chat, because I'm sure people will be really, really interested in that. So we have our first question that's come in. So Kate says, really interesting to see your description of the reduction in value due to time delays. And Kate says that she sees that regularly. And I suppose, sort of springboarding from that, Anna, have you found, because I found that metaphor of the power bank or the battery really powerful. Like, have you used that to explain this idea to people? Or if people were wanting to start, how would you convince them to do just enough to store that power up appropriately and then deploy it?
So I suppose one of the benefits of understanding that is it does give you that ammunition to perhaps argue from that perspective. But it's also the opposite, and that's probably in my current project that I've been arguing from. In that we're meant to be an agile project, but a lot of stuff had to be delivered up front, and a lot of the project is infrastructure related, so it's waterfall. So it's kind of making that argument, when people say, oh, well, the requirement's not right, they've changed. It's kind of like, well, that's because the requirement was written 6 to 9 months ago, and these things have changed since. So we either have to work out some way of changing, finding some way of documenting those changes and move the requirements, or we have to live with the fact that the solution is going to be wrong, which in our current project isn't so much of an issue because it's a pilot project. But if you're looking at implementing a more long-term solution, then it may be an issue. But yeah, certainly if you're trying to argue a perspective, whether it's arguing for a methodology that allows you to have analytical input right up to as close as possible to affecting the change, or alternatively you're arguing the risks, you're explaining why there's a risk to the business analysis
Absolutely.
not delivering that value, then certainly I think it helps.
Definitely. Fantastic. So Sharon says, great presentation. Could you please pop the further reading slide up again? I think, so if you could scroll back to the further reading.
Oh, where are we? There you go. Have your further reading.
Yeah, pop that on the screen we'll leave this
I've got, we can leave that one up there. I'm sure I'm missing a couple of things on there. There was one that I wanted to add, but I didn't.
Yeah, and that book, Ward and Daniel, the benefits management one, I mean, I think the definition of benefits dependency networks is in there.
Yeah,
excellent.
I think you recommended that one to me. I did read that one.
Did I? Oh wow! Oh, there we go. How things come round full circle. So
there you go.
Excellent. Okay, so Nefra asks, in the agile model, do you see the BA as the person who does the pre-project analysis and probably becomes the acting product owner in order to gather user stories from the perspectives of all necessary personas and then support the real product owner? So do you see the BA is getting in there first, doing pre-project and becoming like the acting, or people sometimes call it proxy product owner, don't they?
Yeah. So look, it really depends on the project and on the organisation. Certainly, if you sort of take the IIBA agile model, where you're sort of looking at the horizons and you're sort of looking at your strategic initiative and delivery horizon, there's certainly a role for a BA in all those spaces. And if you're in a sort of organisation where perhaps it's smaller projects, then yeah, the BA may actually traverse that whole horizon. They might be involved at sort of conceptualising the problem and then moving on to define the solution options and then going into delivery. However, in some larger organisations, they're quite defined and they have different people. Some people see that more strategic and initiative role more in the business architecture or enterprise architecture space, moving into delivery. In terms of the role of the business analyst on an agile project, certainly in the project I'm currently on, where we're trying to work agile, there is a product owner, and as the senior BA, it's quite a complex project that involves quite a lot of moving parts, and the product owner is definitely the specialist in terms of the SME specialist in that space. So I see very much my role as making sure he has whatever information he needs available to him in the correct format in order to make the timely decisions. And that for me, I think, is quite key in some of those more critical projects. And certainly I do see a lot of benefit in certain spaces of having that more SME focused product owner. I mean, currently it's electrical systems that I'm working on. I'm not an electrical engineer. The product owner is an electrical engineer. And I've previously worked in health where we've actually co-opted junior doctors to be our product owners. And I've sort of helped them as the business analyst make sense of everything in order so that they can make the decisions. But in the health space, having somebody with that SME knowledge was quite valuable for those short projects.
Yeah. So much of what you were saying there resonated with me, Anna. And I mean, probably a whole nother topic, but I don't know about you, but I find sometimes there's an element of as a BA having to do a little bit of coaching, because sometimes people are put in a product owner role and nobody's actually told them what the product owner role is, and that's no fault to them. They've just sort of landed in it, and they're an SME, and you kind of have to almost like nudge them to understand what the role is in a way.
Yeah, I think there is a little bit of that, and I think business analysts can certainly help in that space. I know product ownership, certainly over here in Western Australia, is becoming its own thing, and there's lots of sort of product owner roles where they expect people to have more product ownership training go into them. And in some domains, I think that possibly works quite well, but in certain in certain areas, having that SME product owner, I think, is quite useful, and perhaps having a business analyst who knows about the techniques, maybe knows about some other areas of the domain like IT, that sort of stuff, is quite helpful.
Definitely. And Louise in the chat says, yes, Adrian, I echo what you're saying, re-coaching and the PO. So it's not just us. That's good. It's a wider issue. So Christina asks, hi, Anna and Adrian. BAs are often perfectionists. This is so true. How do you encourage people to share their work or analysis earlier to ideally release value earlier? And I can resonate with this so much. I'm the sort of person, I've said this before, I'm the sort of person that, like, I like to zoom in on Visio to about 20 times zoom to make sure everything is completely, completely correct and straight, when it doesn't really matter. How would you suggest that we step back to get those things out the door earlier, to actually do that just enough, just in time? Yeah, look, I don't know if I would describe myself as a perfectionist. To be honest, I do. If my name and stuff's going on a document, I probably do take the time to make sure it is perfect to a certain extent. But I do usually, quite often. Well, I do take that, and I've actually written about this in the BA Times. I do take the straw man approach quite a lot. I do the, all right, I think it's like this, tell me I'm wrong. Because usually that's a good way to draw out people's requirements and perhaps get that insight a little bit earlier and move things along a little bit quicker. So personally, I quite like taking that approach, particularly if you've got access to key SME staff. And I do sort of find, particularly in a lot of the projects I've been working on recently, that approach has worked quite well. We've got those key electrical engineering staff, or those key health professionals that you can trust to sort of like get together and go, all right, here's my first cut, what do you think? And at the end of the day, Agile really does encourage that sort of early show and tell feedback, and ultimately it's meant to encourage that failure and trying to be comfortable feeling uncomfortable in some respects. I think that's a bit of a trick as well. Being comfortable and open, and being prepared to feel uncomfortable occasionally. Uncomfortable to get comfortable. Yeah. I was listening to an audiobook recently, and I've got this real feeling it might have been one that Tina, who just asked that question, recommended, and I can't remember the title of it, but I think it's a book which has got a profanity in the title, so I probably won't say it. But it told this story about somebody who was a perfectionist, and one of the things that the person coaching them helped with is said, look, you know what, I think it was like a legal secretary or something, and this person was like reviewing stuff and taking stuff home and creating all this work. And they gave her this challenge of saying, well, we'll just send something out deliberately with a spelling mistake and see what happens. And like no one would even notice, and it didn't matter. And then deliberately send one out with 2 spelling mistakes, and nobody even notices. And it's kind of interesting sometimes, isn't it? Where what we feel is like, we're going to draw a diagram, and someone's going to like say, oh no, that's not strict UML. Like nobody cares. Most of the time, nobody really cares. So. No. And I mean, we all have our bugbears where we want things to be a certain way, and on occasions they do matter. But that's where some of these wonderful techniques we talk about doing on everybody else, we probably need to turn around and do it ourselves. Like, before you set out on something, think about what the definition of done is, so you don't end up going down a rabbit hole. Actually set that up. Find an example that was considered acceptable previously, and there you go. That's what you're heading for. There's things you can do to sort of temper your own enthusiasm to keep going down the rabbit hole. Absolutely. So a question from Cedric next, quite a broad one, so I'll be interested to see your perspective on this, Anna, which is, Cedric says, yes, value equals benefits versus costs, but how do you measure benefits? So that's quite a broad question. I mean, the answer is probably it depends, really, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it depends, and there are different ways. So obviously, the easy one is when it's purely financial. If you can actually distill it down to the finances, then that's great. You know, if we get hit this amount, then it's going to equal this amount saved money. However, quite often that's not possible. So then you kind of have your levels of benefits. So from your sort of financial, you go down to your sort of measurable. So you can measure something, but you know, it's a little bit more vague. So the one that I used in the presentation was length of patient stay in a hospital. So length of stay is generally used as an indicator of financial efficiency in hospitals. But depending on what the patient has, it's not necessarily a good indicator of cost, because if somebody comes in with a stubbed toe and spends a day, that's different to somebody coming in with a heart attack and spending a day. Heart attack's obviously going to cost the hospital more. But comparatively, somebody with a heart attack spending 1 day versus 2 days, then yeah, you've got your costs. So it's a little bit more hit and miss, because you don't know what your case mix is going to be. So you don't ultimately know what the cost is going to be. But at the end of the day, it's a measure of efficiency. So you've got those measurables. So they're your more quantitative type stuff, and then you can get into more qualitative type stuff. So you know, staff satisfaction surveys, that sort of thing, which you can put quantities on it, but it's, you know, it's more of a touchy-feely type measure. And I guess when you're looking at benefits in an initiative, you kind of end up with a bit of a swag of those. There's a few of those things that you can go financial, yeah, and some of those are quite clear cut. You know, we turn that switch on and turn that off, we save. Some of them are more bound over time. You realise your benefits over time. But you usually end up with a few of the touchy-feely ones in there as well, because often they're a good measure of how your project or initiative has gone in terms of sustaining a change over time. For example, if staff are happy by the end of the project and are engaging with the change and all that sort of stuff, then it's likely to sustain for longer. So there's still benefits worth measuring.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point as well, Anna, because I don't know if you find this, but I find sometimes there are things that you know will have a measurable benefit, and you can probably even define the scale of measure, but there is no way with any reality of knowing how far that scale is going to move in advance.
Yeah.
Like, you know, yeah. Like, I mean, like, you know, a classic one is, well, you know, we increase customer satisfaction, so we're going to have more sales. It's like, or more retention. Well, yeah, you will, but like, how do you know if your net promoter score goes up by 1 point, that's not going to mean X%. You know, like it's like a guess, isn't it?
No, and I mean, certainly some of those things are probably better at once the change is implemented, measuring how it wanes over time. So if your net promoter score starts to, you know, you can measure it as a benchmark once your change has gone in, and if it starts to wane, well, that's probably when you need to start looking at continuous improvement and all that sort of stuff. So I think some of those things are better for that. And there's just some things that are just so hard to measure. I know the project I'm working on at the moment is looking at how we integrate PV and customer batteries into the grid. And it's and one of the things that they want to do is try and measure the value that could be released from that. How do you do that? It's just, you know, finger in the air, you know. So there's some people trying to come up with some formulas for that, but yeah, it can be quite difficult.
Yeah, and I'm going to put my really cynical hat on now and say that some discussions about value sometimes seem to very much fit the cost that's required to get a budget approved in some cases. And you have to kind of fight against that and say, you know, hang on a minute, is this really what we think, or are we just doing, you know, is that just going in the business case to get approval? Because that's more of an ethical quandary if that's the case.
Yeah, and I think that's why I kind of wanted to draw the distinction between those things that are purely business and can be done in purely business terms, and so you can sort of say that, you know, we've got business value there. And perhaps those projects that I know a lot of business analysts are starting to work on more and more, the charity and public sectors, that are looking more at those longer term goals. And that's probably where focusing purely on business value doesn't quite work. You actually got to start bringing it back more to a common good.
Absolutely, absolutely. So there's loads in the chat, so I'm going to go to the chat, and if you're attending live and you've got questions, either put them in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll pick everything up that we can. So Hannah says, do you find if BAs aren't brought into a project early enough? I'm just going to answer this and say yes. Whatever Hannah says, it's going to be a yes. Right? No, do you find if BAs aren't brought into a project early enough, you arrive to a set of predefined benefits, and instead the project is then always trying to achieve something which may never have been possible in the first place? I mean, I know what my answer would be to this, but what do you think, Anna?
Yeah, yes, that can happen, and often your predefined benefits are often quite lofty and no real idea of how to measure them. So yeah, I mean, from my perspective, where I've come in to that, that's kind of where I've started, and that's where sort of in my benefits map, where I kind of have those objectives, because quite often particularly in the public service, you come in and there's some sort of policy or something, and somebody's decided we're going to do this to meet that policy, and it's like, okay, I need to draw something so to get from here to here, and here I always tend to put it as my strategic goal or objective, and then sort of benefits objective and sort of work that way. So yeah, no, it's it happens, but you know, as business analysts, quite often we can get very adept at retrospectively fitting a solution to those values.
And retrospectively, proactively, but with rapport, sensitively challenging sometimes, that and maybe remapping that, you know, and I absolutely agree with you on the public sector, it's up to policy, and the private sector that might be up to some strategy or objective, but asking those difficult questions like, are we really sure this is like, can you help me understand how this links? And yeah, so Hannah also goes on to ask how you would manage benefits better in an agile project when things often flex and move. Do we then need to have an element of agile benefits? And she goes on to say that feels like it would require a big mindset shift at higher leadership levels.
Yeah, so and that's probably where you start to get into safe and all that sort of stuff. But I mean, ultimately, when it comes to agile, if you're talking about the purest form, everything you do in a sprint should have some value. Should be assessing the value of your epics and your user stories and that, and actually how's this going to deliver value. And that's really the opportunity for the business analyst to say, all right, this is when we were in our strategy or initiative horizon. This is what we said this piece of work was going to achieve. We're now in delivery, and we're saying these are our priorities. How do they link with that lofty goal? Has that goal moved? And if it hasn't moved, then you know, does the delivery team need to move closer towards that goal and reprioritize based on that? So that's where I see a really key role for a business analyst or product manager in those sorts of spaces, to make sure that ultimately the agile delivery is still lining up with those strategic objectives.
Yeah, and I think that's a really nice way of framing it, Anna, because in many ways, I mean, at least in my blinkered view of the world, like with agile, the requirements discovery, you know, is fluid, right? You don't even try and get all the requirements up front. That's the whole point of it. But actually, the vision and the outcomes, the goals, are fixed until they change, if you know what I mean. Like, actually the vision shouldn't change that often unless there's some external change, right? Like a competitor does something, you're like, oh, that vision's not relevant. But that's like a big product owner type decision. If that's you should say at the strategy horizon level. Interesting. So Sharon says, thank you, this is really resonating with recent experience. That's good to know. Tina says, thanks for the shout out for the Delivering Business Analysis book too. Yes, in fact, we do have one of the authors of, so if anyone would like to ask Tina a question, I'm only kidding, I'm not going to put Tina on the spot there. Mark says, for future reference, I'd be most interested in a presentation on the operational detail as to how an agile BA works with a product owner or manager and a development team. So Mark, we do have some previous presentations around product owner. So if you go to bahub.video, I'll put the link in the chat here. Then if you search for product owner, there's a couple on there. But having said that, if you know someone who has a presentation or would like to speak, please do get in touch, because we can definitely put something around that. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. If I mispronounce your name, I'm very sorry. This is a name I'm not familiar with. It's possibly Virginia, I think. Great presentation and discussion. Do you have any tips to help deliver the message that analysis and the requirements processes need to be done by specialists, so people with business analysis experience, rather than business SMEs or other resources? So that's the whole, well, we make it look easy, therefore people think anyone can do it syndrome.
Yeah, look, SMEs certainly have their place, but often they are specialists, and they're specialists in a particular area. I like to think of business analysts as a little bit more generalists, and so something that SMEs often or can struggle with is that link back to that strategy level, and actually sort of being able to trace the requirements through from the strategic down to the delivery and back up again. So it's really that requirements management that, to be honest, even some that the requirements lifecycle management that even some BAs struggle with sometimes, but certainly SMEs are generally not equipped for that, because that does take a little bit of training over time. So I certainly see that as where business analysts can deliver a lot of benefit to an organisation, is having that wider context and being able to organise and deliver requirements for a project that has that connection to that to those broader strategic or outcomes.
Yeah, do you know what, that resonates so much, Anna, and I think sometimes, you know, getting a backlog of user stories in some way is easy. You can just go and ask everyone what they want and write it down in whatever format they tell it to you. But that's not business, like that's not business analysis. That's in some ways like scribing, isn't it? You know, there's elements of that, right? But like that whole idea of having a requirements architecture, because and this is one thing I find that it sometimes, like I guess as BAs we have to challenge the perspective that like, well we're agile, so we're going to write user stories. Okay, maybe we might use another technique, or we might use user stories and acceptance criteria and a prototype. And the way these things connect to this, we're going to have a user journey, which is going to have prototypes, and that's going to spawn these user stories or whatever. So actually knowing that all those things connect up, and they connect up to those bigger goals, so important.
And then that also comes into your benefits as well, and how groups of user stories relate to your epic, relate to the benefits, relate to the strategic objectives. Having that link right through it should be quite important, because at the end of the day, the organisation should be focused on creating value. So
yeah, and I think it's one of those things, isn't there? Just because someone can write a user story in Jira or whatever, that doesn't mean it's a useful or good user story. But I think as BAs, we bring that value, and we make those connections. So excellent. So Sharon adds that coaching and supporting those people in the project about their roles once you know their expertise is key. And I think, there's an element of that coaching. And let's see if we've got any more questions in the chat. So Sarah says, I used to get stuck on getting it right rather than getting the requirements out, but now it's so easy to collaborate using the likes of Teams and other apps that I find myself wanting to share earlier to get stakeholders on board and on the journey as early as possible. That's really interesting, isn't it? Maybe the remote working tools like Mural or Miro or whatever just enable us to put something out there quickly. I'd never really thought about that. There's probably an element of truth in that.
Yeah, I certainly think those sort of collaboration tools have gotten better, and I think maybe some of the upheaval and stuff in recent times has meant maybe we're a little bit more open with our sharing. We're all in everybody's offices and houses and stuff nowadays. So if you could see my bedroom, then why not see my Miro board? It's kind of, I think there's a little bit more openness to that.
Yeah, definitely. Sharon says, as a people change specialist, so pleased to see the touchy-feely stuff coming in. And I think it's interesting, isn't it, Anna? I don't know about you, but I find a lot of business analysis is actually the touchy-feely stuff. It's the intangible, the people stuff.
Yeah, I always sort of say that there is very much two sides to business analysis. There's the very technical, and there's a lot of quite technical techniques like process maps and entity relationship diagrams and that sort of stuff. And as somebody who comes from started off as a developer, I very much came from the technical side. And really had to work on the other side, which is the workshops and the interviews and the empathy and the personas and that sort of thing. That was a bit foreign to me. So for me personally, that's the side that I've had to work on, and that's why I think business analysis benefits from having diversity, because having people from different domains and from different backgrounds, be it more technical, more softer, that's where I think you get really good business analysis, is where you get that synthesis of different people that are sort of educated in each other and how to use different techniques from a different perspective.
100% agree with that. 100% agree. I think that diversity of experience, lived experience and work experience is so important. And I mean, a whole topic, we could probably do an entire webinar on itself, but like, I think on a project team or a product team, there needs to be some dissent, like respectful dissent. But it's like, if everyone agree, like if everyone's always agreeing, I have that thought in the back of my mind, who have we missed? It can't be this easy. There's never this much consensus. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. In fact, I'm pretty sure I said this in an interview where I was being interviewed by somebody on the chat, that there should always be a healthy tension between the business analyst and the project manager.
Oh yes, that's true. That's true. So Cedric added a comment, I think, from when you were talking about value, that yes, valuation of benefits is when the needs meet the solution. So you could measure if all specifications have the answer, also measure the impacts of the solution, social, technological, sustainable, and if it's aligned to business strategy. And he adds, I think BA's moved to requirement manager to value manager. That's interesting. Yes. That reminds me of something. Some people on the call might be familiar with Chris Matts, who's written a lot on agile stuff, and in fact is I believe I'm right in saying he's the co-founder of the Gherkin syntax, the given, when, then. But I remember on Twitter, years ago, we were a number of us were having a discussion on how would you define a BA in like 120 characters or whatever it was then, and he just pitched in with value definer, and I thought, wow, so ahead of his time, like he always was. Sarah adds, can't underestimate the importance of the touchy-feely stuff. Employee and customer satisfaction surveys are really important measures and often appear in organizational level KPIs. They can often measure the difference between you and your competition, which is very true, right? It's those intangible things. You have the same service, but it's the intangibles that make the difference sometimes.
And that's the thing that will sustain as well.
Fantastic. Well, there's lots more chat, but we're kind of like reaching at the very end of the time slot. I've got just a couple of closing messages, so do stay on the line, because there's a few things if you're tuning in live that you'll want to stay on for. But Anna, I just want to say thank you for such an insightful and really interesting webinar. I'm absolutely certain that people will want to connect with you. They'll want to stay in touch with you. How can people get in touch?
LinkedIn is always a good one. There is thankfully only one Anna Rajander, so yeah, you can find me. There certainly is only one Anna Rajander in Perth, so.
Yeah. I'll just pop your LinkedIn address in the chat here. And I always think, for those of you attending live, like, this is the point in, if this were a real world presentation, we'd be giving a warm round of applause. Well, we can't do that in a virtual environment, but connecting with someone on LinkedIn is really like giving them that warm round of applause and that feedback. So do connect with Anna. Also, if you've enjoyed the webinar, feel free to connect with me, follow Black Metric to see more stuff like that. But I just want to, before I close the session, let you know about a couple of things that are happening. First of all is our next webinar, which is on the 12th of December, which is 6:30. It's 12th December, 6:30 p.m. UK time. So probably not too sociable if you're in Australia, but in other parts of the world, more sociable. And that's called Moving Away from Backlog-Driven Development, a New Chapter in Agility, with Alan Kelly. And if any of you know Alan, he's normally pretty radical in his thinking. So I'm really, really looking forward to what Alan has to say there. Also, you may well be interested in BA Digest, which is a quarterly PDF magazine. And one of the things we've recently done is released a search function for it for the entire back catalogue. So if you are, say, interested in agile or product ownership, or if you want to see the 2 articles that Anna's written, you can just write Anna in the search and pull up those articles. So do check that out. Thanks, Hannah. Hannah says BA Digest is awesome. Thank you very much. And of course, sign up if you're not already signed up. You don't need to sign up to view it, but if you do sign up, you'll get it in your inbox as and when it arrives. So all that's left for me to say now, again, is a massive thank you to Anna for for such an insightful presentation. Massive thank you to everyone who thank you. Massive thank you also to everyone who attended live, or indeed if you're watching the recording. If you are attending live and you're thinking, wow, there are some colleagues that could really benefit from viewing this session, well, the great thing about it is going to be, is recorded. It will take me about 24 hours or 48 hours to get it edited. If you opted in when you signed up for the webinar, you'll automatically get sent a link to it. If you didn't, then you can go on bahub.video in a couple of days' time, and it'll be on there. And do pass it on to colleagues, right? That's the great thing about the BA community. It's kind of giving, right? We all tend to give and support each other. So, well, everyone, enjoy the rest of your day, whether it's evening, morning, or wherever. Take care. Thanks again, Anna, and see you next time. So bye for now, everyone.
Thank you.